Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. If you are the type of person that hears the phrase campaign finance reform and rolls your eyes in boredom, well, God help you. Or the next film we're talking about can help you. Dark Money tells the story of what happened in Montana following the Supreme Court decision of Citizens United and how Montana became a microcosm for what's happening all over the country in local and national elections. It is nothing short of disturbing. Let's take a look.
You know, the number one rule of political or watchdog reporting is follow the money.
John Adams here. I covered the legislature for the Great Falls Tribune.
A source of mine had come across something that I might be interested in.
Voters in your district had never seen something.
No, this was a whole new political attack.
They send out all these mailings. They don't care if they lie.
Nobody knows who they are. They call them dark money groups, and that's exactly what they are.
Corporation funnels money to a
Dark money group. They send out postcards attacking the opponent. When that candidate gets elected, they support the agenda of the corporation.
I don't know how to fight them. I can't pick up the phone and say, hey, what's your interest in candidate X? Because I don't know who they are.
And it's not just Montana.
Campaign finance is the gateway to every other issue that you might care about.
Americans are barraged by these political advertisements that are funded by who knows whom. We don't even know if they're domestic.
Politics is just child's play to business. They know how to manipulate the system.
You can buy the politicians, you can buy the judges.
When I first got to the FEC, I thought that we would work together on issues such as disclosure.
If A fails 3-3, Ocean fails 3-3, that fails 3-3.
The FEC will not enforce the law.
New allegations in court against a leading legislator.
What's at stake is whether or not Art Whittick broke Montana campaign finance laws.
Do we care enough to demand that politicians comply with our campaign laws?
The bottom line is, did Whittick know that he was receiving all of these services?
I'm going to call it like I see it. This man cheated.
The people who want to keep dark money have a real problem. The public does not agree with them.
They want a government that works for them. It doesn't work for special interests, doesn't work for political parties, it works for them.
This is scary stuff, but I think this is the proving ground now for the American experiment.
Everybody, please welcome director Kimberly Reed and John Adams. Journalist John Adams, head of the Montana Free Press. John Adams, excuse me. Congratulations on this documentary. I hate to use words like important because I think it makes people feel like something is important, but it's incredibly important. It's incredibly well told. It's entertaining, it's fast moving, it works like a thriller. And we are really living in the middle of a thriller right now. Every day it feels like there's a new turn, there's a new twist, but as your documentary says, if you go back to campaign finance reform, you can kind of see these twists coming a little bit. You can see the road a bit before we actually get to those stops. Let's talk about how you started making the film. I imagine you found John, and that was what started it, or did it start before that?
You know, I live here in New York now, but I'm from Montana, so I was kind of watching what was happening back home with this really important issue, because as you say, it is important. It is the gateway issue, as somebody said in the trailer. I don't think that you can really solve any political issue, whether you're on the right or the left or whatever the issue is, unless you know about the money that's behind that, about what people are looking for when they're trying to get this person or that person elected. And so I was keeping an eye on how things were playing out back home. I saw that there was a lot of attention to these issues on a national level, but that Montana was really becoming the battleground for it. The same people who were behind Citizens United, and that's the Supreme Court case that kind of started this whole ball rolling, that said that corporations could give unlimited amounts of money. They could spend unlimited amounts of money in a campaign election.
Let's backtrack for 1 second, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what people think Citizens United means. Corporations can spend an unlimited amount of money. I think that, to a lot of people who don't know the ins and outs of the law, think that that essentially means Apple could donate money. That's fine. Apple donates however much money they want to a candidate. But we would know that that's not the case really with Citizens United. Can you talk about the kind of floodgates that were opened with the Citizens United decision, John?
Well, what Citizens United did is it basically said that corporations are have the same free speech rights as individuals. The court basically said that money is speech, and you can use that money to influence elections, to give to these super PACs. And Citizens United, in and of itself, what that did was open up the floodgates of corporate spending in elections through super PACs, but there was always this anticipation that there would be disclosure, that we would at least know who the corporations are. And what we have right now is a lack of laws and enforcement of existing campaign laws that do require disclosure. And so what we have is a situation where we have these 501c4 issue advocacy organizations who are not required to disclose their donors. And so those are nonprofit corporations that can then educate the public by sending out mailers and buying advertising on TV. And so they're not expressly supporting a candidate, they're supporting an issue, but they're supporting those candidates by attacking their opponent and saying, call Senator so-and-so and ask them why they, hate babies, or whatever.
But if any of us saw these advertisements, these postcards or the radio ads or the TV ads, we would all look at it and say, that's a political ad. That is trying to influence an election. So it's really, really has just become a big loophole in the way that campaigns are run. There used to even be a distinction between giving to a super PAC, where you have to disclose your donors, and giving to a C4, a dark money group, where you don't have to disclose your donors. But now everybody's sort of figured out that loophole, drove a truck through that, and now what they do is you'll just give money to a C4 that then gives it to a super PAC. So you go to the super PAC, say, where'd your money come from? And they say, well, it came from this, Americans for Apple Pie dark money group that we got over there. So it's just another way of hiding the money trail. And, that becomes especially alarming when you think of what's in the news a lot today, that we don't even know if this money is coming from Americans. It looks like there was a lot of overseas influence, a lot of foreign influence in the last election cycle.
Foreign influence from?
I mean, it's been well documented that we already have some coming in from Russia. And here's just one line of following the money that you could do in the federal elections that happened last time around. Russian oligarch money, we know, went to the NRA. We know that the NRA was the largest dark money group that contributed to the Trump campaign. There are dots that are missing there, but those are the facts that we know so far. And that's
we currently have Donald Trump at a NATO summit right now advocating for Russia and for the destruction in a lot of ways of the Western alliance, which is a primary goal of Vladimir Putin. I'm not trying to draw conspiracy theory lines here, but I think it's pretty obvious.
And yeah, so those are the dots, and I think we all kind of see those dots all the time and kind of suspect that this is how the system works. I think what we show in our film that takes Montana as the microcosm is, we were fortunate enough to have a couple of accidental disclosures, a couple of whistleblowers who really, put themselves on the line to tell what the whole story was. And we could lay out all the dots and connect all the dots and really show what the game plan is that a lot of these campaigns follow.
Let's talk about those whistleblowers, because oftentimes I think, and it's my fault right now for even going towards Trump this early in the conversation, it immediately turns the conversation into like a team sport kind of thing. Oh, okay, you're just a Democrat and you hate Republicans, or vice versa. But one of the whistleblowers in this film and in the story was a Republican, was a fairly far-right Republican in a lot of ways, who saw that the way the money was coming in was, she thought, illegal and inappropriate, right? You know the woman that I'm talking about who became
I think you're talking about Sarah Arnold. Who,
yes.
Sarah was, she was an employee of one of these dark money groups, essentially. And what they did is they offered to candidates in Montana a program, a campaign, basically, a ready-to-go boxed campaign that include walking lists, it include mailing lists, it include language that was written by the Right to Work committee out east in Washington.
The Right to Work Committee, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but the Right to Work Committee is essentially someone at a group advocating for right to work laws, which is
anti-union.
Yeah.
Yep. And so what these candidates got, so in Montana, our legislative races are often decided by a couple of hundred votes, and that's because some of these races only have a couple of thousand people voting in them. It's a very rural state. And so what they did is they went to districts that were very conservative districts. So essentially, whoever wins that primary is going to be the next legislator from that district, House or Senate. And so what they weren't doing, they weren't trying to influence the outcome of an election in terms of Republican or Democrat. It was predetermined it would be a Republican in that office. What they were doing is they were seeking to get Republicans in office who would toe their line, would push their agenda in the legislature.
Their agenda being union
anti-union, but these campaigns didn't really have anything to do with right to work. The campaigns were about abortion. They were about all of the issues that Republican voters care about. Yeah, and so they targeted incumbent Republican legislators. They recruited candidates who would use their campaign, and then they literally carpet bombed these primary races. Days before the election, voters were getting dozens of postcards with messages about how heinous the incumbent legislator was. And nobody had ever seen that before.
Heinous in ways that were almost implausible and ridiculous.
Comparing the candidates to mass murderers.
Oh, right. One of them was like he's friends with John Wayne Gacy or something like that, right? Sorry, that's insane. That's totally crazy. How do you find, telling that story of an actual conspiracy that took place, using dark money and using these 501(c)(4)s, how do you take that as a microcosm and talk about what's happening on a national scale right now in terms of policies that we're seeing take effect?
Yeah, well, I think all we do is we just build a mystery story, right? I think it kind of plays like a spy novel, and we see it. I kind of jumped over your question a little bit earlier about how did I first connect with John, and that's because I was following the reporting that he was doing in Montana, which is a state where people really pay attention to where the money is coming from. I think there's a long history of people being skeptical of the influence of corporate money in politics, so people pay attention to it. And John was one of the reporters who was writing these stories that was really following this issue. There were a couple others. And at first, he was just, a resource for me. I was studying it. After a while, we met. About a year into it, we met and just started comparing notes because we were following the same big developing, spy novel, Russian spy novel. And after that, I finally convinced John that he should go on camera, which is something like reporters sometimes don't want to do because they don't.
Your primary character, your private detective.
It seemed like it would be a really good way to tell this story, to see the world through his eyes as he was digging through stuff. I had watched All the President's Men about 20 times and kind of studied the way that we uncover this really complicated story through the eyes of these two journalists who were following it. And so we just started following it together with John kind of as our envoy guiding us through this world.
John, you started the Montana Free Press, which I think covers a number of things, but I think one of the primary pieces of coverage that you do is campaign finance reform, right? Is that specific to Montana these days, or have you broadened that out into sort of covering that nationally?
I got a long way to go before Montana Free Press goes national. So during the course of this whole process, which I think I met Kim in 2013, a lot of things happened over the course of those years. And one of the things that happened was, like a lot of print newspaper reporters from around the country, I was in a position where I lost my job because of downsizing of the newsroom. And I wanted to continue to stay in Montana, and I wanted to continue to cover these issues. And I was hoping that somebody would knock on my door and make me an offer to come work for them and continue to follow these things. And when that didn't happen, I decided that I would try it on my own. And so I started the Montana Free Press, and it is slowly gaining steam. It's a nonprofit organization, so we don't take, or we take money from individuals, donors, foundations, and that sort of thing. And so I'm still in the process of building that and getting that on stable footing, and we'll see what happens from there.
Now, I wanna ask you, is because all the candidates during the national election in 2016 said that they didn't take money from. I mean, Donald Trump specifically said, "I don't take money from the Koch brothers," and that was a huge part of his platform, was that he financed his campaign himself. What have we learned since then, and how has dark money played a role in his campaign, and I think maybe even in the policies that we've seen come forward after his election?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and it just goes to show that this is not a partisan issue. That when you look at the influence of money in our politics, especially dark money, where we don't know where it's coming from, if you look at that issue, it's really bipartisan across the board. Ever since Citizens United was passed in 2010, and again, about 3/4, 80% of the American public says, that we just think this system is busted and it leads to corruption, and we need to do something to fix it. And in the last election cycle in 2016, we basically saw everybody saying the same thing about how the system is busted and how we're going to fix it and how we need to drain the swamp. What we also see time and time again is that when people get into office, they rarely do anything to change the system that just got them elected. So that's one of the things we're trying to do with the film, is to show that, in a state with a Republican legislature and a Democratic governor, that they could work together to pass some of the strongest campaign finance laws that anywhere in the country.
Do you hold out hope for federal campaign finance laws to be passed in any way?
I think it's going to be tough. I think it's going to start at the state level and move up in the way that a lot of other issues have gone. But, politics, all politics are local, this famous phrase. And what we're starting to see now, I have a Google alert, for the phrase dark money, and we're starting to see, city councils come up with resolutions saying, we think this is how it should be. And, school boards, Koch brothers in 2014 spent money in 2 school board races in Corpus Christi, Texas. I mean, there's a lot of, this is trickling down pretty deep into the roots of our politics. And you're also seeing school boards saying, we don't think that we need to have disclosure laws in our school board races so we can see where this money is coming from. So yeah, I think that that's how this kind of microcosm works in Montana. If we can show that you can do it there, it's a model that can be applied to different states. It requires a little bit of adjustment from state to state. That's how these campaign finance laws go. But it's certainly possible, and I think a really hopeful message too at the end of the day.
I agree. That's one thing that I was shocked by with the movie, without giving any sort of spoilers away, is that there is a hopeful message at one point, because rarely in any movies about issues right now, or any conversations about issues or articles, do we get a glimmer of hope. And it was kind of nice to I was explaining the movie to someone recently, and they were like, really? There's hope at the end? And I was like, yeah, no, it's kind of nice.
I get it. I wanted to add on something Kim was just talking about there. I get asked all the time, what can I, after people see this film, what can I do? I definitely know, I get that sense that there are a lot of people out there who, if there is hope, they want to know what they can do. And what I keep telling everybody is the best way to fight back against this stuff is to get involved, in your local elections, get involved in your local campaigns, support candidates, individuals, organizations who demand campaign finance reform. Ann Ravel, who's a former FEC chairwoman, has a quote in the movie where she says, campaign finance reform is the gateway issue to every other issue you care about. And that is absolutely true. No matter what it is that you care about, if we don't get a handle on our campaign finance system, we're never going to solve any of those other issues. And so and the other part of that is we need, and something that Kim's film shows, is we need a strong, independent fourth estate, a free press, to to fulfill the role that we can't necessarily rely on our government institutions to fill anymore, and that is educating the public about what's going on and bringing transparency to these debates. And so my message is twofold. One, get involved in your local, and it's not a partisan thing. It's just demand clean elections at every level, any way you can. And the other thing is to support your local journalists, whether it's the New York Times or whether it's a nonprofit news outlet or whether it's, you know, whoever that might be. Whoever's paying attention to these issues, subscribe, donate, do what it, you know, show that you care by supporting the free press.
There's an organization called INN.org, Institute for Nonprofit News. That's an umbrella organization that has a bunch of other organizations like John's that are within it. So if you're from a different state, sometimes it's city by city, there are nonprofit news services that are members of INN.org. So you can go to INN.org, enter your local, you know, where you live, and see if there's an organization that you can support that's really local. There's also some national...
Three of the organizations in the film actually are INN members, not by design, but by coincidence.
Yeah. And there's also some national organizations that are working on money in politics, on campaign finance reform, that have chapters all throughout the U.S. Common Cause is one that has a lot of chapters, and there's another national organization called everyvoice.org that is working on this issue a lot.
You know, someone says it in the film, and we've said it a number of times here on the stage, that campaign finance reform is the gateway to any issue that you could possibly care about. When we say any issue that you could possibly care about, I think so many of the ones that we care about right now feel exacerbated and feel as though we have cared about them for so long without any actual government to come in and take a handle, take some control over these issues that we care about, actually do something decent about it. Why is it campaign finance reform is a gateway to those issues? Who is financing these candidates and these campaigns that don't want these issues taken care of for the people?
I'll just tell you a quick little anecdote. We showed this film at the Nashville Film Festival. A week before we were there was a ballot initiative where Nashville is trying to decide whether they should put a lot more money into their public transportation system. There was a bit of a debate, then all of a sudden a bunch of dark money showed up. Some of it was Koch brothers money, but there was a bunch of money they couldn't account for. Like, who else has a dog in this fight, right? Why do they care about this? Turns out it was the guy in town who owns all of the auto dealerships, right? So, he probably doesn't want to have a public transportation system. Now, that's a debate that all of us could have.
We knew where the money was coming from.
Yeah, and we should have that debate about how much money to spend on public transportation. Maybe that's a little bit too much. Maybe we don't need that line. Maybe a bus would work over that. But let's have that debate. The thing that is so offensive to me is giving all of that power to one person with money who hides their identity and starts playing in elections to move these big issues without letting us have that debate. I mean, that's how democracy is supposed to work, and that's why it's so crucial that we get plugged into those debates, especially at the local level.
Why are so often, and I hate to make this just about the Koch brothers in any way, because dark money comes from so many other different places, but we do see their hands in all of these elections, whether it's public
They're the biggest player.
They're the biggest player, and it's always public schools, public transportation. It's not really socially right-wing, although they use those things, to, I think, to sort of amplify the base a little bit. What is their interest in the destruction of public schools, the destruction of public transportation, all of these things that feel like a gateway to, or historically are a gateway to the middle class?
You know, I'm certainly not going to speak for the Koch brothers, but you know, I think that they have an ideology that believes that, my understanding is that they believe that they believe in the free market, and they believe in less regulation, and they believe that the less government, the better. People get to make their own decisions about how they want to make their money, how they want to spend their money, what kind of schools they want to have. So, you know, I don't really know how to answer your question about, you know, what their end goal is, other than they want to influence our politics so that they can form. They're billionaires. They're some of the richest people on the face of the planet, and they want to shape our planet in their in their worldview. And we had a whole system of government set up to prevent that kind of thing from happening. And because of the
economy set up to prevent that kind of thing from happening.
And now we have a set of rules that don't apply to them. And so the solution again, I think, is there needs to be a popular movement here to demand this. That I think if everybody who cared about all of these issues came together and focused on this particular issue, campaign finance reform, that would be a gateway towards starting to solve some of these individual debates. But as long as we can't, as long as the debate is removed from the public and is happening behind closed doors, where money buys all the influence and the public voice and the public will doesn't matter, we're in trouble.
Absolutely. Did you want to?
Yeah, and that's I think with this issue about what was going on in Nashville and the Koch brother money that went into there, I think they would probably say that they oppose any taxation that's going to go to this, that it violates the liberty of the citizens of Nashville to be taxed to create this system of public transportation. So let's have that debate. I mean, the actual one good thing about Koch brothers' influence is they kind of don't care if they're known as the people who spend a lot of dark money. I mean, at least we are able to track their influence a little bit more than some of the others, in part just because there is so much money. But what concerns me almost as much is the local guy in town who starts up a C4 and starts moving policy, and we don't have any idea who that is, and we can't track it back to somebody else. That's the stuff that is really harmful, and that's why it's so important to go back again to disclosure, because a lot of people don't realize that even within the Citizens United decision, even with the Supreme Court that we have today, that we're going to have after the next appointment, what we have on the books is an 8-1 decision within Citizens United that says the most important thing is disclosure. The reason that we can let corporations and unions and individuals spend unlimited money in political campaigns is because we are presuming that we know where the money is coming from. That's how it works in theory. That's how it's supposed to work. It's not happening in practice, but the laws are on the books, and those laws can be enforced, especially at the state and local level.
So Citizens United, just backtracking all the way to the beginning of our conversation, opened the floodgates for corporations or whoever to spend as much money as they wanted, but there are laws that say they have to disclose where the money is coming from. Unfortunately, there are current loopholes that have not been fixed.
But voters can demand that, and I think that that's really what we've seen in Montana is that they kind of flip the script of the whole political culture, so that if you're going to run for office, people are going to want to know where the influence is coming from. People are going to want to know. They're going to keep an eye on huge influxes of money that are coming from some group, usually out of state, and they're going to want to track that, and they're going to hold candidates accountable for that money that they're getting.
Is it working in Montana? Are the loopholes closed for the most part and working?
I think it's working better than it has. I have not seen evidence of the types of campaigning that we saw in 2008, 10, 12, 14, where we had these just massive dark money campaigns, having a huge influence on the outcome of these individual targeted primary races. We haven't seen that. There is still dark money. There are still groups that are active in Montana, but a huge part of why they're less effective is because over the last 6-8 years, the media in Montana, the local press, has done a really good job of exposing these issues and really educating the public and the electorate on what is dark money, how does it work, who are these organizations, why you should be suspicious of it. And so I think a lot of Montana voters now, when they see these flyers arrive in their mailbox or when they see an ad on TV, they question, who is that? What is that group? Does that group actually exist? Is there such a group as Mothers Against Child Predators, or does that just exist on paper? Is there, so there's that suspicion now, which I think is healthy. And I think that's, again, to go back to beating my personal drum, my hobby horse, this is why it's so important to have an active and vibrant press. so that we can be educating the public about these things, and so that voters, when they go to the voter booth, they're skeptical after having been bombarded by all these advertisements.
At the end of the day, it's really about media literacy. It's really about being able to be good citizens, good voters, and educate yourself, and to be skeptical.
To be engaged. Yeah. Well, let's
get your information from somewhere other than Facebook.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Next question. Right here.
Hi, I want to know more about the documentary process and what surprised you while you were making the film, because documentary filmmaking can be so unpredictable.
So there's a big surprise that John already alluded to. In the middle of filming, it's like our main character is this guy who's digging into all of these mysteries, right? Because he's a journalist, and he loses his job. So that was a big twist. What I find a lot of times as a filmmaker is that I try to console myself when things don't go the way that you think they're going to go, that you had everything planned out and this is going to be perfect, is that those twists and turns that happen in real life are actually really dramatic twists and turns that you can put into the film later on. And I think they play that way. That's just how it goes. So yeah, trying to find ways to kind of capture those everyday, drama that happens in our lives and keep that in the film and let that inspire it is really important.
I think we have time for one more.
Hi. So since you were speaking of like the twists and turns that happened in the movie, and I was really intrigued by the part that you said that one of the biggest contributions to the Trump campaign came from the NRA. I was wondering what was there any what was the most shocking thing during the process of the filmmaking that you were glad to capture on camera?
Yeah, there's should we talk about? So there's I'll just say, because spoiler alerts, because it's a spy novel, right? It's this whodunit sort of thing that we follow in the film. But I will just say that there are a number of accidental disclosures that happen when you're like, what? That they found a box of documents where and why? How did that come together?
I remember when that happened, like a couple years ago, and it was like everyone was like, no, wait, what? How did that happen? How did this happen? And even in the film, people can't really explain it.
Yeah, and it's but it kind of goes to what we were talking about before, that it's all about disclosure. It's all about giving journalists, giving citizens and voters the ability to follow the money, to see where these elected officials' influence is coming from, which is, that's a potential for corruption. So if we can weed that out, we're much better informed as a population. So yeah, we had some accidental disclosures for these wild circumstances that let us follow the story. We also follow a kind of another interesting little mystery novel that takes place in the state of Wisconsin. It does not turn out well there. It's kind of serves as a cautionary tale in the film. But yeah, at the end of the day, whether those disclosures are accidental or not, whether they come from whistleblowers or not, it's all about disclosure, and that's what everybody needs to keep their eyes on.
Yeah, if I have time to add something to that. When Kim first approached me, I, like a lot of other people, kind of rolled my eyes at the idea of a documentary film about campaign finance. The thing that really makes this film so remarkable in my mind and is somebody who is a part of it, but also somebody who is just kind of skeptical of Kim's whole concept of a feature-length documentary film, is there are so many things that had to happen along the way over the course of the years that she covered this film. So many pieces to this puzzle had to fall into place just so in order for us to ever get to that final understanding of what really happened. And for her to be there, to capture that was really remarkable. And it is a unique case, and I think Kim really kind of struck filmmaking gold by being in the right place at the right time for all of these accidents.
Guys, congratulations on the film. It's incredibly important, but it is a thriller. It's like a great spy novel, as you said. How can people check out Dark Money? When can they see it?
So lots of info at darkmoneyfilm.com. darkmoneyfilm.com. The screenings we're rolling out this summer nationwide, and we're going to have a broadcast in the fall before the election. So there's also a lot of resources there if you want to tap into a group in your hometown, you want to figure out how this dark money game is played and what you can do about it in your community. You can check out the Get Involved page at darkmoneyfilm.com. We're also on Twitter at darkmoneyfilm, and same thing on Facebook.
Everybody please give them a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you.